Hi everyone! In this video I will show you how to create a folded hem by binding off and sewing it on at the same time. At first I'll show you how to do it in the round, and then I'll also show you how to do it flat. And these tutorials are for the Maman sweater, but as with any of the tutorials I've shared, they apply to any project that you're doing that's using these techniques. So I hope you find it useful. So as you can see, I'm just about one stitch away from the beginning of the round, and then I'm ready to bind off and sew on together. So that's what I'll show you in this tutorial. You don't need to do a separate bind off and then sew it on. We'll do it all in one go. Now what I've done, the pattern will explain to you that after you finish your decreases, you should basically be at the sleeve length to start your folded hem. And the folded hem, if you're hitting the row gauge, will be needing 12 rows to create a final 2 centimeters, like I just explained. So what I've done is, just after my decreases, when I started the 12 rounds, I marked the very first stitch of that very first round so that I would see now where's 12 rows down. And then I've done the same again, sort of halfway around the round, just so that when I'm binding off, I can just keep myself in check and make sure that I'm still on the right round for binding off. Hopefully that will make more sense as we go. But that's what these removable stitch markers are there for. So we'll get rid of them as we go along. If you're finding this a bit tricky and you're having to undo it a few times, it might be worth just counting from a few different points, counting down however many rows you need, and marking it with a stitch marker, just so that you keep yourself in check and that you make sure you're continuing to sew onto the right round all the way around. So that's what these removable markers are for. Now, you will need about 2.5 times of the circumference of your cuff as a tail to start sewing it on. So I'm being quite rough here with my measurement. I'm just going it around, and kind of that much is like 1 round for me. So I'll just double that. And then I'll be generous. I'll go 3 times the length, just so that I make sure I have enough. And then you can snip that, and that's the yarn being put away. Okay, so I have about 3 times the circumference of my cuff here as a yarn tail to use for sewing in. And now I'll just thread my needle. There we go. Okay. Now I will just knit this last stitch here before the beginning of the round starts. And then I can remove my beginning of the round marker. This can go now. And I'll just let all these stitches go onto one needle. So as you've seen, I've used the magic loop technique for my sleeve. Okay. So now I have my first stitch of the beginning of the round, and I have marked my 12 rows down in the first stitch there. So if you're confident with it, you could just count the rows down. So let me just show you. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Or you can do it as I did it, and basically when you start the 12 rows for your cuff hem, you can just mark that first stitch. Either way, if you're confident counting, do it that way. Otherwise, just do it in the beginning. And now I will just take my needle with the thread, and I'll go into my stitch, drop it off the needle, and I'll go into this little hole from where the stitch marker is sitting, which I can remove now actually. There we go. And just start sewing it together. So you can pull it a bit more taut as you go. And now I always kind of find it a bit more helpful to hold the needle like that. It's a little bit more awkward when you're doing it in the round than when you're doing it flat, but you'll get there. So if you can see that first stitch here, you always have kind of a wave of knots from the pearls. What I need to do here is make sure that I keep to the lower knots in this round here when I bind off, just to make sure that everything's even and that I'm not slipping up the next row. So second stitch, take it off, go into this lower one, and there we are. You can pull a bit more taut as you go. And the last stitch will always kind of show you where you are, just in case you're unsure. It's really important now that you really don't go up or down a row or go into these knots, because otherwise it'll look either skewed or your folded hem will look larger in places or smaller depending on where you go in. And there's no problem if you go above or below a row, you can always just undo it and try again. I'm just coming around to the halfway marker that I placed, and I just wanted to say, when you come, if you're using the magic loop technique as well to create your sleeves, if you're coming to the end of the stitches that were on the needle, just pull them through. And then for this bind off, I think it's best to just put all the stitches on the needle, and then as if you were using the magic loop technique again. So for example, if I still had more stitches to go, I would just leave some on the wire and then put all the stitches on just the needle. And I think that way it's a lot easier to fold over and control where your thread and needle are going, and to actually see where you're going into. It's a good idea to keep checking on the back whether everything still looks good and even all the way across, which I'm actually pretty happy with this. If there ever was anything and you wanted to undo it, it's a pretty simple thing to undo if you ask me. So your loop is here of your live stitch, so you just pop it back on, and then this is the thread that you're using to pull through. So it's pretty easy to undo if ever you are thinking it's not looking like it should. What I'll also say is that the closer you get to the end of your round, the more difficult it'll become to hold the stitches parallel to where you're binding off. So if all of my leftover stitches here were on this one needle, you see, I'd find it pretty hard to properly hold it parallel and bind off. So just put fewer stitches on your needle. If you're using the cable again, just put a few on the cable so that they can rest there, and then you'll just have a few on the needle, and it's a lot easier to hold the needle parallel to your bind off edge. Okay, I'm on the last few stitches to bind off, and now I'm actually just finding it easier to fold the sleeve kind of around itself like that, and that's making it a lot easier to position my needle parallel to where I'm binding off to. Okay, so this is my last stitch here. So I'll just take it off and then go into the last one here. There we are, and that's it. Beautiful folded hem and binding off at the same time. So hopefully that will save you a little bit of time, and I think it looks very neat and chic from the right side and from the wrong side. If you're finding this flaring out a bit too much, you could always weave in a little bit of elastic thread, or maybe an elastic itself, since you created a hollow space in here now. But yeah, that's it for using this technique in the round. Flat, it's really kind of just as simple, but I'll show you anyways in case you would like to see. As with the technique in the round, you have to just count how many rows down you need to go. Still 12 for me in this example, and then you bind off in exactly the same way as you would in the round, only that you sort of end in one point and you're not going around like you would if you're doing it in the round. I'll show you anyways, just in case anybody would like to see. So the only thing that's tricky here, I would say, is identifying the stitches, because this part of the Maman sweater, you basically created a split hem. So you have your front hem, which I've already done here. And now I'm working on the back hem. And the way I instructed, you do the edges here, you're creating a slip stitch and then a yarn over, and on the next round back you are knitting them together, which is creating this lovely edge that doesn't roll in. It looks nice from the front and the back. It's very easy to do, but it makes the stitches look a bit different in the back. So this first stitch I'll bind off onto these ones here. If you followed the instructions correctly, you will not have a yarn over left at the end of this row. But if, like me, in this case, you forgot that you weren't supposed to do a yarn over on your very last round when you started, then I'll just show you how you knit them together and then bind them off. So first stitch I will insert here, and then I'll show you where my second stitch goes, and from the third one on I counted 12 down here. Oops. As with the cuff bind off, I'm using about 2.5 or 3 lengths of yarn as a tail to ensure that I have enough to bind off properly. This is a very rough measurement, but I find that it works. Okay, threading the needle again. Just because of the way that these yarn overs are created, I'll actually go into the back stitch here first. So the one that's on the wrong side of the jumper. But only this one time. Okay, and then I'll go into this front stitch. For the second one, I'll go into my live stitch first. And then I'll have to wriggle this a bit so that you see, but my purl bump is here. I have to move this curling edge stitch away a little bit, and then you can see it nicely. There you are. Okay. Now I can remove my stitch marker. And just continue binding off, making sure that you're not switching and dropping a row or going one above. It's always useful, I find, to hold it straight every now and again, so to just force the fabric apart a little bit and make sure that you're still on that same line. And if not, you just undo, start again. This is a slow knit process. I'll just continue doing this. I'll leave the video running for a few more seconds just so that you get the feel for it, and then I will come back to you when I'm at the edge. Okay, I'm on the last few stitches and I have bound off all the rest of my hem. It's looking good from the back as well. The stitches don't look slanted, which would be a giveaway that you have either bound off one before or one after at the start. So, like I told you, I have, when I knitted the last row for this split hem, I have forgotten that I needed to omit the yarn over at the start, so the instructions will tell you for that last row not to do the slip stitch and yarn over, only to slip the stitch. I've forgotten to do that, so now I have got this yarn over here, which would be weird and hard to bind off. So all I'm going to do is bind off my last normal stitch here, like I do, like I've shown you. So in there. And then literally all I'm going to do is knit this yarn over together with that last stitch. As you would in all the rows before. There you go, and now you have your one stitch that you can bind off. And there you go. Now what I like to do is just sew this edge with shut. But you don't have to do that. That's really, it's not much of a gap anyways. So this is the way to bind off and sew on to create a folded hem, either in the round or flat, for the Maman sweater.